Hi, friends. It's your girl Harpo. Welcome to this episode of Brown Girl Guild titled 10 Things I Didn't Learn About Sex. I'm so nervous to record this podcast episode because I know people in my family are going to see it. I hope they don't listen to it. If you're in my family and you're listening to this, turn it off. Go away. Leave me alone. Anyway, getting back to the episode. Now, in this episode of Brown Girl Guilt, I want to talk to you all about the things I didn't learn about sex growing up, whether I was in high school, whether I was in my early 20s, or things that I am learning now currently. And the reason that I want to do that is because we've been talking a lot about this not knowingness this season at Brown Girl Guild. We've sort of titled this season unofficially Teenage Fever because we're going back to what it was like when we were teenagers to explore that not knowingness, that awkwardness, that confusion that we experienced as teenagers. All that to say that, this is a feeling that can carry over into the rest of your life too. Like, it's not just something that you experience when you're a teenager, but you might experience this not knowingness later on in life too. And this not knowingness when it comes to sex and sexuality is also like something that can stick with you for a very long time. You might be like well in your life, like you might be a lot older and still not know enough about sex. And you might not have the knowledge to equip yourself to practice in healthy, pleasurable, comfortable practices of sex. So I want to take it back. I want to take it all the way back to, when I was in high school and I didn't learn about sex. I mean, I don't know about you all, but like my sex ed wasn't really comprehensive at all. It was, you sex ed was like, okay, like this is how a period happens. And then you learn a little bit more about, the different body parts and the different elements of your reproductive system. And that's sort of it. Like that was the extent of my sex ed. And I didn't learn anything at home either. Like there was just nothing that I learned at home. And if you listen to the Brown Girl Guild podcast episodes chronologically, the one that was just released before this one, and even if you don't listen chronologically, you can always go and listen to it. It's called Stop Asking Me When I'm Going to Get Married. And in that episode, we talked about how annoying it is that like everyone is always asking, mostly women, like when they're going to get married. That question is asked again and again. And the reason that it's so frustrating to get that asked that question is because like the pipeline from when you were not allowed to talk to boys, not even allowed to look at boys, to when are you getting married is actually a really, really wild one, right? And it's frustrating because they've literally never talked to us about anything regarding healthy relationships, especially about sex. But like, I don't know about you, but like, I didn't learn anything about sex at home. There were certain times in my life that my mom sort of talked about sex and sexuality with me, but for the most part, it wasn't really talked about much. And so the first time that I realized how limited my knowledge of sex ed was when I attended a workshop called Shades of Brown Girl. So it was hosted by a group called Shades of Brown Girl, and it was in partnership with Didi Hood. It was in Vancouver in 2019. And basically, what we were asked to do is we were asked to pick a color that was pre-selected by the workshop facilitator Amrita, and each of the colors had attached with it like a topic or a theme. And so I picked the color purple, and the theme or topic for the color purple was sexuality. At that time, I didn't really know why I connected with that color and that theme so much and why it was resonating with me so much until I started to write. And so I wrote 3 passages that were related to the color purple and related to the theme of sexuality. And this is still a post on Instagram. It was posted on March 27th, 2020. So I'm going to read out the 3 passages that I wrote as part of like a larger story about the theme of sexuality that I wanted to share. So here it goes. The first passage reads, I'm sitting on the dining table with my mom and my 3 best friends. We're talking about boys and eating my mom's biryani. I'm stuffed. I love my mom's biryani. In the middle of our conversation on boys, my mom speaks up. Girls, don't ever give away your Ghana. I'm confused. Your what? I ask. My mom goes, your Ghana. Respect yourself. Don't ever be easy. She's talking about virginity. The second passage reads, I'm wearing a bright yellow shirt and my big hoop earrings. I'm driving all the way down the highway. My palms are sweaty on the steering wheel and my stomach is in knots. I'm losing my virginity today. All I can think about is my mom and the guilt. If only she knew her daughter was hitting 100 in an 80 zone after having told her she was just going to the movies. That really, she was going to a hotel far, far away from home. My stomach churned and my legs were shaking. My mouth was dry, my heart in my throat. If only she knew her daughter was giving away her Gerna today. That's wild, right? Shit. Third passage. Destiny's Child's independent woman goes off at 9 p.m. My alarm to take my birth control pill. My mom and I are at a reception and she glances at my phone. You're probably not taking the pill for PCOS. You're probably doing the other deed with it. So I ask her, why is sex such a bad thing? Who taught you that and where did you learn it? She tells me a woman feels dirty after having sex, that you don't feel good, that it's never about you, so why do it? She says sex never gets you respect. So those three passages revealed a lot for me in the way that I viewed sexuality and the way that I viewed sex and how I experienced it and navigated through all of it. And so much of what sticks out is that there is, of course, a not knowingness, but so many preconceived notions about sex, right? So many different understandings of sex that I didn't arrive at or arrive to on my own. They were always passed on to me, they were taught to me, or messaging that I picked up from other places around me, especially in my family, especially in my relationship with the women in my life. And so there was a lot that I didn't learn about sex growing up. And I thought, what better way to capture all of it than put it into a podcast episode and title it 10 Things I Didn't Learn About Sex. So here goes. I want to share with you all the 10 things I didn't learn about sex. Number one, sex is pleasurable for women. I think so much of our messaging in pop culture is that sex is for men and that they're the ones that enjoy it and that they're sex obsessed and sex crazed. And that, sex is something that women don't necessarily enjoy, that they don't talk about, they don't think about. But contrary to popular belief, I can 100% attest to this. Women actually talk about sex more than boys do, like more than men do, like comparatively, like if we're going to look at it from a very, heteronormative perspective, I think women talk about sex so much and we definitely want it. Messaging has told us that we don't want it and that it's not pleasurable for us, but it absolutely is. And for so long, the messaging that I received was that sex is pleasurable only for men. And, it's all about the male ejaculation. It's always about like him coming first or like him experiencing pleasure. And I don't think that I ever was taught growing up that sex can be a pleasurable thing for women. For the most part, a lot of my sex ed was that sex is literally just for procreation. It's a man and a woman. They come together, they do it to have a baby, and that's usually it. Or that they're doing it in like, they're doing it in a monogamous relationship where they're like committed partners or they're life partners or they're married. And so it wasn't something that, you could just do recreationally. Like you can just like participate in sexual activity and, be having, all the sex just for pleasure. Like I was never taught that. It was always that there was an intention, there was a reason behind it. Number two, what I didn't learn about sex is that it can and often will be awkward. I think we watch movies and we watch music videos and we hear songs and like there's so much messaging around us all the time that makes it look like sex is really magical. It's like fun, it's easy, it's to the point, and it's consistent. But the truth is that it's actually a very, very awkward experience, and it can be a very awkward experience when you're first trying it out and you're first doing it. And it doesn't matter how many partners you've had or how many times you've done it. The truth is that first or second time that you do it with someone, it might actually be very awkward for a very long time. And we're not taught that. We're not taught that it can be awkward. I feel like we're so shut off from the realities of what it actually is. Like we've just been fed this fake perception of it, So the third thing that I didn't learn about sex is that you might not be satisfied the first time. And I think this goes hand in hand with the awkwardness, right? Sex is like kind of nerve-wracking, kind of, JK. It's really nerve-wracking. And you can be really in your head. Like you can be so in your head. And I think it's actually a disservice to the actual act of sex to think that it's merely physical. It's not. It's actually very mental. It's very emotional as well. And, if you're not into it mentally and you're not present emotionally, you might not actually experience pleasure physically. And so you might not actually be satisfied the first time because you might be so in your head. Like you might be so confused. You might just be like really, really nervous. And you just might be overthinking the whole thing. So it might not actually be satisfying the first time. And also, like, it could just not be satisfying overall. Like you might just not have chemistry with your partner. And, we're not taught that chemistry, sexual chemistry is something that you should be seeking actively. Like if you're with a partner and everything clicks and perhaps there isn't sexual chemistry there, or that, you're perhaps not attracted to them sexually, that's like enough grounds for you to like, vocalize it and perhaps ask for change or like exit from that scenario if it's not giving you what you want, if you're not satisfied, right? I remember, being intimate with someone and immediately after, he was like done his situation, he like literally like just like packed up and was like, all right, peace, see you. And I was like, what the hell? Like, and for the longest time, it felt like that was normal. Like it was normal until I started to talk about it with my girlfriends, started to talk about it with other women in my life. And everyone was like, that's actually not like, no, like, not that it's not normal, but it's just like not okay. Like don't think that that's the standard. Don't think that that's how it always has to be, because that's not true. Like yes, there's the possibility that you might not be satisfied the first time, maybe the second time, but if it's something that's happening consistently over time, that is enough grounds for you to actually say something about it. Number 4, your identity doesn't change after you have sex. Okay. So I think that our society is so obsessed with sex, to be honest. It really is. It's so obsessed with it. And it really, there's this like perception that after you've done it, you've changed, you've grown, you've become this like brand new version of yourself. And the truth is that's not always true. Like your identity doesn't have to change just because you've had sex now, right? You were worthy before, you're worthy after, you were cool before, you're cool after. Your identity does not have to change, right? It's not like all of a sudden now that and I think like not even like the first time, like how often you do it or how often you don't do it doesn't actually change anything about you, right? Like your self-worth is not placed in that. Like your self-worth is not tied to how much or how little sex you're having or what kinds and what kind of not sex you're not having. It's just those things just do not relate, right? And I feel like for the longest time, if I go back to that Ghana story, I just felt like even the messaging that I was receiving that like, you're not respectable afterwards. You're not, oh, like I hate this. Like there's this connotation of like cleanliness, right? Like you're just not clean. You're not pure. And like after you've done it, all that stuff is crap. Like I understand that it's rooted in like really deep patriarchal, misogynistic understandings of women's bodies and their pleasure and their agency in life. I understand that it's really heavy, and I don't necessarily think that I have the space or the capacity to go into that here, but I think it's crap. Like just to say it straight up, it's bullshit. It's crap. You do not change just because you have sex. And, if you haven't actually had it yet, it doesn't actually make you any less, right? It doesn't make you any less than someone who has. And then how much of it you're having, how many partners you have, slept with doesn't actually change who you are as a person. It doesn't impact you as a person. And it's such a disservice that we teach our young daughters, we teach our young kids, women in our lives, the opposite, right? Number 5, sex doesn't just mean penetration. Yeah, I know people are like, but that's the definition of it. It's sexual intercourse. I think overall, our understanding of sex is very limited, and we always think about it as penetration. And I can think of one big, big reason that's a problem. For queer relationships, right? If we think that sex is only penetration between a heteronormative couple, then we're ruling everything else out, and we're not allowing that to have the same sort of place in merit, right? And so for the longest time, I think we placed as a society so much importance on penetration as like the biggest thing. But the more and more I'm journeying through and I'm experiencing pleasure and intimacy, I'm realizing that penetration isn't just it. Like, that's just not it. That's not the end of the world. And intimacy can be experienced in so many different ways, right? Like, you can exchange intimacy with somebody and be really vulnerable and not having gone that direction at all. Like, you might not have ever even made it to that part of your experience with the person. That doesn't mean that you didn't experience intimacy, or that you didn't experience vulnerability, or you didn't experience a connection, right? Or that you didn't actually, I'm just gonna leave it at that. So that was a really big myth. That was something that I didn't learn. Number 6, something that I learned is that my partner is always going to know what to do. So one thing that I didn't learn about sex is that your partner actually doesn't always know what they're doing, right? And they don't always have to know. And especially for me in my case, right? Like, I always felt like the guy was going to be more knowledgeable. Like, he was going to be the leader. He was going to know what to do. And sometimes you get there and you're like, yo, buddy, like, bro, like, you actually have no idea what you're doing. Like, can you just like, can you not? Like, can you just like zip your pants up and like go away, because you literally don't know what you're doing. And I think it's such a disempowering, disembodying thing that we teach women, that they need to be submissive and that the partners need to be more dominant and they need to be the leaders. And it's actually a disservice to the men as well, because there's so much pressure on them to know it all, to have it figured it all, and to like essentially fake it. And it doesn't leave any room for them to also be vulnerable and address the fact that they might not know what's going on, or they might not know what to do next. I think it also strips us of our sexual agency as well, to like lead and to tell our partners what we like, what we don't like. And when you think that your partner always knows what they're doing, like, you just don't feel empowered enough in that scenario, right? Number 7, one thing that I didn't learn about sex is that sex is a give and take. Truly, it's a give and take. So I shared that story earlier about how, Buddy kind of just like pulled his pants up and was like, I'm done. Peace out. See you never. And I think that that's wrong. Okay. Like, it's literally a give and take. And I don't think that's something that we learn as young people. We don't really learn that, right? Like, we think that, especially as women, that we have to keep giving. We have to be the ones giving and giving. And yet, it's totally okay to be on the receiving end. It's totally okay to like not want to give and like, and to receive, and then to like switch that dynamic up. It is a series of give and take. And truly, like, when you're with a partner, like, you want to do things to actually make them happy. You want to make sure that they're feeling pleasure and that they're feeling good and taken care of. And so that can only happen if we're not necessarily being selfish, right? Like, if we're participating in a mutual exchange of that, that's going to be a lot more pleasurable and comfortable for both everybody involved, right? So number 8, the 8th thing that I didn't learn about sex is that it takes two to tango. Okay. Now let me tell you what that means, because that's not obvious enough. It takes two to tango means that it's the responsibility of all parties involved when you are experiencing intimacy and you're exchanging that kind of intimacy. Now, what that means is, like, for the longest time, I always felt like, the safety and the health of myself and my partner was all about me, and that the protection was always on me. And that's just not true, right? Like, if two people, and maybe more than two people, are coming together to experience this, the responsibility is on everyone, right? Like, it's actually not just my responsibility to sort it out, if in the case of, if there is the chance that perhaps pregnancy does happen or anything else happens. Like, it's not just my responsibility, right? There was multiple people involved. And then on the flip side, I think women, like, we're so used to just leaving protection up to our partners. Like, we just assume that our partners are going to be in control of protection and that they're going to be the ones who have it all sorted out. But it's a disempowering thing to believe in, because you need to be able to take the agency and control over your own body and your own experience. And so what happens if, like, you are with someone who really believes in protection, and then you were banking on your partner to show up with it, and then your partner doesn't show up with it, right? And if you had just gone that extra mile, if we just felt comfortable, like, honestly, straight up, I'm just going to say it. If we felt more comfortable buying condoms, having them around, if we felt more comfortable, bruh, like, there's nothing that we couldn't do. You know what I mean? I truly believe that. Like, if I was confident enough to walk into the corner store and buy a condom, my life would be very different. You know what I mean? It truly, truly would be. So all that to say, it takes two to tango, right? It takes two people to do the tango. If you're doing it alone, you're doing a solo dance. Number 9, sex doesn't have to be fearful. Oh my God. Holy, like, I feel like I was scared about sex for my entire life, right? There was so much fear that was instilled in me, and fear in so many different ways, like fear of shame, fear of guilt, fear of being judged, fear of being disrespected, fear of, like, I don't know, like getting knocked up, fear of violence, fear of being mistreated and taken advantage of. Like, women are scared into not wanting to have sex all the time through history, right? There's so many tactics that sort of like try to, like, honestly, like I'm just gonna say it, like they try to keep our legs closed. Like, there's so many things in the world, in pop culture, in like the messaging that we receive, even the way that my mom was speaking about virginity and the way that she called it a gana, like, for those of us who don't know what a gana is, it's like a really valuable, expensive piece of jewelry. And even her using that as a connotation, as a metaphor for virginity, is like, I mean, like, think about how terrified you would feel if you lost a really expensive, valuable piece of jewelry. Like, just, and then you'd have to, like, deal with the repercussions and the ramifications of it. Like, it's a really fear, right, inducing experience. And so if the messaging that I was receiving at home was that my virginity is Gana, it's valuable, it's inexpensive, it's like really, really like valuable item, then there's a lot of fear, and you feel like you're safeguarding it, right? Like, you're holding on to it, you're really watching out for it. And the thing about fear is that it strips us of our control and agency in how we actually perceive something and how we navigate through it. And so, because my view of sex and sexuality was rooted in fear, it was something that I just stayed away from, right? And I was denying myself that experience for a very long time. And so, something that I'm relearning at the moment is that sex doesn't have to be fearful at all. It can be a very happy, fun, lighthearted, positive experience. Now, the last thing that I didn't learn about sex, and I think so many of us like do not arrive to this conclusion ever in our lives. So I want to say thank you to all of you listening for allowing me to be the one that brings you this information, this knowledge, this wisdom. And if it's something that you already knew, but perhaps you forgot, I'm also really honored to be able to bring this back to you. But the 10th thing that I didn't learn about sex is that sex is a sacred energy exchange. Now, what that means is that sex is an exchange of energy, right? Like I said, it's a give and take. And so when you are intimate with someone, sex is actually the fastest way to absorb somebody else's energy. And it's also the fastest way to give somebody else your energy. And so it is a sacred energy exchange. And we use the word sacred because it's you allowing someone into your most intimate field, right? It's allowing someone into your most intimate field of energy. Now, I don't say that to say like, to be stigmatizing, to be judgy, or to put a damper on your choice with like who you exchange that energy with. I want to preface that by saying that sex is a big deal and sex is not a big deal, right? So sex is not a big deal in the way that like we typically think of it, right? Like, I think this idea of losing your virginity is ridiculous, right? It's not, you're not losing anything. You're not giving something away, right? You're having an experience. You're actually adding to your life as opposed to giving something away. And then I think the concept of body counts is also really, really bizarre. Like, why does it matter how many partners you've been with, how many people you've had sex with? As long as you're doing it in a healthy, comfortable, safe, consensual way, it really doesn't actually matter how many people you have sex with. In fact, that is again a tool of the patriarchy, a tool of misogyny to keep women in control, to control women, right? So sex is not a big deal in that way, but sex is a big deal because how much energy is exchanged between you and people. I want you to think about, some experiences that you've had with partners in your life. You might be able to reflect on those experiences in a really positive way and perhaps in a very negative way. Sometimes when you're like coming home after the experience, you're coming home after the exchange, sometimes you might still feel really good. You might be happy. You might be feeling great. Other times you might be feeling really low. You might be feeling a little bit negative, not judging yourself and not regretting the experience per se, right? But you're just feeling a little bit low. And that moment, like to really sit with yourself after you've experienced that is so important because that's an indication of what kind of energy you've picked up now, right? So if you're feeling low, maybe it's perhaps because the person that you had sex with has little bit lower vibrating energy, and now you've exchanged it, you've picked up on it. And if you're feeling really good, it might just be like this person has really good energy and you guys vibed and you guys were on the same frequency and energy, and it's a good time. And so because sex is such a sacred energy exchange, it's really important who you do it with, right? And again, I'm not saying that you shouldn't have multiple partners or you shouldn't have casual sex. That's not to say any of that. Like if you wanted to, you just met someone, you wanted to bang them, you wanted to do it, go ahead by all means. But you have to be so careful about who you're doing it with, because you're picking up on energy and you're also giving your energy away as well, right? It's a really important thing that you do, right? And so all that to say that, sex is so complicated, right? It's so complicated. It's so multifaceted. It's so diverse and it's so unique, right? Like everyone's experience is so different within their own bodies, and then with their partners, and then with the next one and with the next one. It's just so different. And a part of me, holds a lot of understanding and empathy for like my parents and some of our educators, because perhaps in their minds they were doing the best that they could in trying to keep us safe, right, and trying to keep us secure. But the reality is that a lot of information was missed and there was so much that we didn't learn. And sex is such a vital, important part of our lives, and we're all entitled to it, right? We're all meant to experience it in the way, in the range that we want, on the spectrum that we want. And if we're giving our power away to somebody else by not educating ourselves or denying an education to ourselves or to somebody else, it's such a disservice, right? It's a disservice to us and to the way that we embody our body if we're not allowing ourselves to step into that. So, in me sharing the 10 things I didn't learn about sex, I'm sure there were so many things that you probably snapped your fingers to, nodded your head at, and were like, yeah, I didn't learn that either. And, it might have been like you had an awareness of that from before, or you just found out about it here in this moment. And after this episode, you might also think to yourself, wow, there's so much more that I didn't learn and I don't know about sex. I would encourage you to ponder it, to meditate on it, marinate in it, write it down, talk about it with your friends. Just start talking about what you didn't learn about sex. And I promise that when you start to talk about it and you start to give awareness to it and you start to bring it into your orbit, that's when you get to correct it, right? So, of all these 10 things that I listed about what I didn't learn, I'm really, really committed to changing this dynamic, right? I remember saying to someone, just because you're finished doesn't mean we're finished. And that was so bold. And it was such a badass moment for me. A friend of mine said to me the other day, she goes, she was with someone and she just straight up asked the partner, what's your plan? What's your plan here? What is it that you're trying to, achieve here? And, it was such an empowering question for her to ask in the moment. And so, I think most of us who listen to the Brown Girl Guilt podcast are women. And even if you don't identify as a woman, you're listening to this, I still hope you got a lot of value out of this. I think we need to start asking those questions of ourselves and of our partners and of the general society around us, right? So I want to leave that's what I want to leave us all with. What is it that you didn't learn about sex and wish that you did learn? And how can you equip yourself with that knowledge now to move into a more comfortable, pleasurable, healthy relationship with sex?